I used to think I was the luckiest woman alive. I was engaged to the kindest man I'd ever met, welcomed by a warm family, walking into a future that looked almost perfect. My wedding day was meant to be the first chapter of that dream. The moment I stepped into the aisle, something shifted. My hands were trembling as they held the bouquet. My dress clung to me like a promise I wasn't sure would be kept. As I looked around the room filled with familiar faces, I spotted her, Rebecca, my husband's sister. Her expression didn't show anger or sadness, not even mockery, just a chilling stillness. Her eyes were wide, her head slightly tilted, lips twitching at the corners like something held back. There was no smile, no nod, no warmth, only a stare so cold it sent a ripple through my chest. She wore white, a long floor-length lace gown, not off-white, not blush, pure white. She carried a bouquet that wasn't large but still striking. The kind of thing you'd see in a wedding. Except it wasn't her wedding. I caught my mother's concerned glance. I heard murmurs. But I kept walking, as if everything was fine. I had spent 2 years learning how to keep my face still whenever Rebecca was around. I smiled. Because I had trained myself to. I was marrying the man I loved, and no one, not even his sister, was going to take that moment away from me. The ceremony continued, picture perfect on the surface. The flowers, the speeches, the tears. Then came the wedding video. It was supposed to be sweet. Childhood memories, dating clips, our engagement in Sedona. I'd selected and submitted the footage myself, weeks before the wedding. Double-checked every frame. The projector screen lit up. The sound began. The first clip wasn't me. It was Liam. With someone else. His ex. They laughed on the beach, kissed in a car, held each other at a party. The images were crisp, intimate, and unmistakable. Gasps echoed through the hall. Nervous laughter faded into silence. I felt my face burning, my body locked in place. Liam turned toward me, eyes wide, speechless. I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. But somehow I smiled. A warped, mechanical version of what I thought a bride was supposed to do. The planner rushed to stop the video, mumbled apologies, switched the music. The guests tried to carry on, but the damage had already taken root. That night, while removing my makeup and trying not to cry in the honeymoon suite, I received an email from the event company. They apologized again. Attached was a recording of the confirmed phone order. According to them, the file played was exactly what was submitted, confirmed by a phone number. The voice in that recording was unmistakable. It was Rebecca. Her tone was calm. Her instructions were specific. I listened more than once, until I couldn't doubt what I had heard. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip. It was planned. I considered showing Liam, but then imagined him defending her, telling me it was a misunderstanding, that I was overreacting, that she didn't mean any harm. I saved the audio. Quietly. And for the first time, I started documenting everything. A private log. Wedding day. White dress. Wrong video. Recording confirmed Rebecca submitted it. No apology. No explanation. A few days later, Rebecca called. Said she wanted to drop by. I politely declined. She came anyway. She brought wine, red, expensive. A wedding gift, she said. I didn't drink. It was a bad week for my stomach. Liam did. Just one glass. Shortly after, he felt dizzy, weak, nauseous. I helped him to bed. He said he was just tired. But the next morning, he remembered nothing. Not the conversation. Not going to bed. Back to the log. Red wine. Only Liam drank. Symptoms: disorientation, memory loss. Delivered by Rebecca. The dreams started after that. They weren't nightmares. Not exactly. Just shadows, being watched, being trapped, poisoned. I woke up holding the blanket in fists so tight I couldn't feel my fingers. I knew I might be spiraling, but I also knew the alternative. A few weeks later, another package arrived. Beautifully wrapped. Inside was a book. How to Erase Someone's Footprint. Legally. No note, just a tag. The handwriting was familiar. I began checking everything after that. Rebecca's hands, her bag, the kitchen. She always hovered there too long. One day, after she'd left, I noticed my supplement bottle was open, the lid slightly off. I took it to the pharmacy. Asked if anything looked tampered with. The pharmacist shrugged, said the B12 tablets looked a little lighter than usual, but it could be the lighting. That went in the log too. I bought hidden cameras, one for the kitchen, one in my purse. I didn't tell anyone, not even Liam. I no longer believed this was petty jealousy. This felt like a game, a controlled, cruel, calculated game. Rebecca had once been a medical resident at a prestigious hospital. Then she quit. No statement, no details. Liam told me she had burnout. I didn't question it. Until I met a nurse from that same hospital at a health fair. We chatted, casually. I mentioned Rebecca's name. The nurse's expression darkened. She changed the subject almost instantly. I didn't push. I just added to the log. One evening, I went through our wedding photos, hoping to find comfort in memories. That's when I noticed him, a stranger, a man in a gray suit, sitting at the edge of the reception, looking straight at me in every frame he appeared in. Liam didn't recognize him. Later that month, I shared one of the wedding pictures on my Facebook page. A new comment appeared, from an unrecognizable profile. The wrong bride always smiles the brightest. I blocked the account, but that chill stayed with me. Something told me Rebecca wasn't acting alone. One afternoon, I came home early. The house was silent. Liam had messaged he'd be late from work. Soft music was playing, classical, from the living room speakers. I never played music from that account. No one else had access. I checked the rooms. Everything looked normal, except the coat closet. The door was cracked open. My jacket had been disturbed. I checked the camera footage. The clip from that afternoon, corrupted, unreadable. I sank to the floor. Rebecca had planted herself into the core of my life. Her presence was everywhere. And still, I had said nothing, warned no one, held it all inside, thinking I could manage it alone. But there are storms you cannot manage. And Rebecca was a storm that hadn't even made landfall yet. I never thought I'd remember the scent of a cup of tea. But I do. Clearly. The warmth of ceramic in my palms, the faint trace of mint, and a strange sweetness that lingered on the tongue, like someone trying to bury bitterness under a layer of sugar. Like Rebecca was trying to bury something behind her gentle, manufactured smile. It began on a gray, overcast morning. Liam had just left for work when the doorbell rang. Rebecca stood there, beige paper bag in hand, a smile that looked like she'd just won a game no one else knew they were playing. Inside the bag, a Japanese-style teapot, a pouch of dried herbal leaves labeled Herbal Fertility Boost, and a small gift box wrapped in cellophane. A handwritten note was taped to it. For the days you need rest and renewal. I smiled politely, thanked her, placed the bag on the counter. She didn't come in, just made small talk, gave me one long, calculated look from head to toe, and turned to leave. But before she did, her eyes flicked briefly, precisely, to my lower abdomen. Just 1 second. But it froze the air around me. I had never told anyone, not even Liam, that we were trying for a baby. It was new, private. We had only stopped using birth control 3 months ago. No one knew. Yet somehow Rebecca did. Or guessed, or watched, or worse. Maybe she had read my medical file? I didn't drink the tea that day. I made a cup for show, Liam never suspected, and poured it quietly down the sink. The smell was subtle, the taste unforgettable. 3 days later, Liam began to change. Fatigue, insomnia, heart racing, irritability. I asked him if he'd had any of the tea. He nodded. Rebecca had told him it was good for male fertility. I smiled on the outside. Inside, I was screaming. I took a sample of the tea, sealed it, sent it to the hospital lab using my personal account. The results came back 2 days later. Trace amounts of reserpine, an alkaloid that lowers blood pressure, slows the heart, and acts as a mild sedative. Not toxic in small doses, but over time, it could affect the nervous system, sexual function, reproductive health. I felt my blood freeze. I added the results to the same locked file where I had stored everything: the wedding video, the voice recording, the strange gifts, my survival file. Liam didn't know. His mother didn't know. But I knew. And now, I was afraid. Rebecca started visiting more often. She brought cookies, bone broth, flax honey granola, chia smoothies. All good for women preparing for pregnancy. I felt like a trapped animal, being fattened for slaughter. Maybe that sounds cruel, but when every bite of food, every sip of water becomes something you have to sniff, test, doubt, your instinct stops caring about manners. Once, she brought a jar of rare dark honey, handwritten label, potent antioxidant, take every morning. I smiled, stirred a spoonful into water, then poured it silently into a separate jar. I sent it to the lab too, this time just high sugar content. Nothing illegal. But I didn't trust it anyway. What frightened me more was how Rebecca looked at me when I didn't drink it. She didn't comment, didn't question. She just stared, long, still, and smiled. The kind of smile that counts down. I installed hidden cameras throughout the house: kitchen, living room, medicine cabinet. One afternoon, while reviewing footage, I saw her. It was broad daylight. I had been at the hospital. Liam was meeting a client. Rebecca had let herself in, using the spare key. No call, no message. She walked straight into the kitchen, opened the spice cabinet, pulled out a yellow-lidded jar, switched the cap, put it back exactly where it had been, then walked into the bedroom and stared at my vanity table for over 2 minutes. I didn't know if I should call the police, but I knew something had shifted. This wasn't toxic anymore. This was invasion. I changed the locks the next morning. Liam noticed, asked why. I mumbled something about safety. He nodded, still unaware. But I knew it wouldn't stay that way forever. I just needed one final proof. And it came. On a Tuesday afternoon, while working at the hospital, I received an anonymous email. No subject, one attachment, an ultrasound image, a fetus, roughly 6 weeks. Mother's name, mine. Exam date, last week. I froze. I had never been pregnant, never had that scan, never booked that appointment. But the file showed my ID, my birth date. Only, the phone number, address, and email weren't mine. Forged, intricate. Rebecca had been an OB/GYN resident. She knew the system. She had access. She knew exactly where I received care. I couldn't breathe. Someone had stolen my identity to fabricate a pregnancy that never existed. I went to admin, asked for the last IP login to my file. They refused. No investigation without formal cause. I had no choice but to stay quiet, but my hands trembled for hours after. If Rebecca was building the story that I was pregnant, what was she planning next? A week later, Liam came home with news. Rebecca had bought an apartment, walking distance from our house. She wanted to be closer to family. I nearly collapsed. That night, I heard a soft knock at the kitchen window. I thought it was wind. But the next morning on the glass, faint, unmistakable, a lipstick mark. I thought I was going insane. But I wasn't. I was just a woman being slowly undone by poison sweetness. I had smelled it in the tea. I had seen it in the footage. I had received a scan of a child that didn't exist. And I knew. This was still just the beginning. I used to believe that with enough evidence, the truth would stand on its own. I trusted logic. I trusted the cameras, the notebooks, the sealed lab reports with my name on them. I believed, naively, that if Rebecca ever crossed the line, I would bring everything to light. That people would see the truth for what it was. I hadn't anticipated what it feels like when the very weapons I'd counted on begin to turn to dust in my hands. When the truth itself starts to vanish. When the footage disappears. When the hard drive becomes an empty void. When everything I'd carefully preserved becomes invisible. That was the day I realized. The only thing I truly had was a carefully orchestrated illusion of control. It started on a perfectly normal morning. I opened the camera app like I always did, checking the recordings from the night before. Every file showed an error. Not just one segment, 2 full days, corrupted, unplayable. I moved to my computer, tried the backups, same thing. Error messages, files not found, format unsupported. I opened my drawer, pulled out the portable hard drive I kept hidden beneath old shirts. Locked away where only I would know. When I plugged it in, it was empty, completely wiped. Not a single folder, not a single byte of data. The drive had been reformatted, clean, intentional. I checked the drawer's lock. It looked untouched, but something felt off. The logo was different. The finish on the metal, too new, too clean. I never replaced that lock, and no one else had the key. Liam didn't even know I locked that drawer. He never cared to check. Suddenly, my entire body went cold. Not because the data was gone, but because someone had gotten in. Someone had entered my private space, swapped out a lock, and left, as if nothing had happened. Smooth, surgical. Designed so I might not notice, so I might question myself. But I knew. This wasn't an accident, and only one person in my life had the audacity to pull something like that. I rushed downstairs, opened the small safe where I kept the printed documents, test results, photo evidence, lab reports on the T samples. Everything was still there. But my trust was not. My camera, my locks, my backup systems, all compromised. Rebecca wasn't just entering my house anymore. She was inside my reality, infiltrating it through cracks I didn't even know existed. I pulled the SD card from the backup camera in the kitchen, the one I still swapped out every 2 days. Only one file was on it. 8 seconds long. No kitchen footage, not from my camera. It was a handheld video, recorded from behind me. I was sitting on the couch, reading, head tilted slightly, oblivious. I don't remember anyone being behind me that day. I didn't hear anything. The angle, it couldn't have come from any fixed camera in the house, which meant someone had been inside, with another device. They'd filmed me, in my own home, then swapped the SD card, erased the real data, and left. A message. No words. No threats. But the message couldn't have been clearer. I see you, and Rebecca wanted me to know. If she could do this, what couldn't she do? I considered going to the police, but I had no usable evidence, no witnesses, no fingerprints. And if I tried to explain how my sister-in-law, who bakes cookies and drops off herbal teas, was secretly replacing security systems and leaving behind surveillance videos, I know exactly how I'd sound. A stressed-out nurse, struggling with infertility, imagining things. I thought about telling Liam about everything. But then I pictured his face, confused, skeptical, hurt. And worst of all, that flicker of doubt in his eyes when I couldn't explain why there was no footage, no drives, no backups. I wasn't ready to risk that. Not yet. So I moved to Plan B. I made 2 copies of every physical document I had. One, I mailed to an old friend out of state. Someone who didn't know my family. Someone who wouldn't ask questions. I told her it was personal paperwork. Just hold on to it for a while. She agreed. No questions asked. The second copy I hid at work, in the archives of the hospital clinic, under a false label, secured with my own lock. I started journaling every detail: dates, times, emotional state, even tiny observations like the smell of the tea or faint lipstick stains on the doorknob. I read guides online about how to organize evidence for restraining order cases. And I quietly consulted with a lawyer, an older woman who'd handled psychological abuse cases before. I didn't give her the full story, just enough. She didn't judge, didn't tell me what to do. She simply said, "Keep documenting, keep your copies. When the moment comes, you'll know." For 5 minutes, I felt safe. Then the fear came back. Liam left on a 2-day business trip. That first night, I heard soft footsteps above me, coming from the rooftop. We don't have an attic, only a rooftop drying area, with a heavy lock. The footsteps stopped after a few minutes. No door sounds, no voices. The next morning, I checked. The lock was different. Older, rusted, but not mine. I didn't have the key. Nothing else looked touched, but everything felt wrong. I realized I no longer controlled my own house. I was living in a glass box. Every move, watched, but from the outside, it still looked perfect. A kind sister-in-law, always bringing soup, vitamins, advice. Who would believe that she was switching memory cards, replacing rooftop locks, falsifying medical records? Who would believe that she'd made herself invisible? I remembered one afternoon. Rebecca stood outside my front door, didn't knock, didn't smile, just stood there, staring at the hanging fern on my porch like she was watching it breathe. When I opened the door, she turned slightly, tilted her head, her eyes scanning me, like I was a lab specimen. I smiled, nodded, closed the door behind me. I didn't need any more confirmation. All I needed now was timing and a clean checkmate, because when you've been watched long enough, when every shred of proof vanishes, when you live in doubt and no one believes you, you either wait or you fight. And I had stopped waiting. I was already planning how to end the game. Rebecca disappeared for 2 full weeks. No texts, no calls, no surprise visits, no explanations. I didn't ask. Liam didn't mention her. The air in our home felt lighter, as if a poisonous layer of dust had just been wiped from the walls. I started cooking again. I opened the curtains each morning. I placed dried flowers in the bathroom as a symbolic way of reclaiming the space that used to feel like mine. But I couldn't feel at ease, because when someone like Rebecca goes quiet, it doesn't mean they've given up. It means they're preparing something bigger. So I began moving first. I ordered a new set of cameras from a less-known supplier, installed triple-layer encryption, and disconnected them from the main Wi-Fi network. Each device was linked to an offline storage system, one that couldn't be accessed remotely. I hid them in places she'd never suspect, inside a rolled-up towel drawer, behind a kitchen cabinet door, and inside an old wall clock no longer in use. I changed how I documented evidence. It wasn't just typed notes anymore. I created handwritten logs on unlined paper using blue ink, folded into a worn cookie tin no one had touched in years. There were moments I thought about telling Liam, but I'd lost faith in the power of words without living proof. And Liam, with eyes always fixed on what was reasonable, still lived in the belief that his family couldn't possibly devour his wife from the inside out. Time wasn't on my side. Rebecca was not the kind of person to retreat without a counterattack. I needed to strike first. I began retracing her last steps before she vanished. I went through my inbox, call logs, camera data, trying to recreate her presence from fragments. Little habits stood out, how she always adjusted the same picture frame in the living room. That last time she came by, She hadn't touched it. Nothing had been moved. She left everything as it was. Clean. Silent. No trace. Then I found it. A folded receipt tucked between other crumpled bills in Liam's wallet. It was a pharmacy slip, no name on it. Cash purchase, no prescription. The medication listed? A hormonal regulator typically used for mild endocrine issues, or reproductive manipulation. I had never taken that drug. Liam hadn't mentioned buying it. I didn't ask. I didn't react. I simply noted it down. Pasted a photocopy into my journal. Circled it in bold red ink. On day 12 of Rebecca's disappearance, Liam took a phone call. I could hear the shift in his voice, tight, but trying to sound normal. Afterward, he told me Rebecca had taken a break, gone to a remote mountain area for rest, no phone access, wanted everyone to stop worrying. I nodded. But I knew this wasn't a retreat. This was staging. I couldn't sit still. So I began doing what Rebecca did best, planting traps. I placed a tube of hand cream in the bathroom, treated with a mild agent known to react under UV light if it touched human skin. A little trick Rebecca once shared over dinner, disguised as a quirky science story. At the time, I laughed. Now I used it as bait. I kept a pocket UV light under the bed. Each night I scanned doorknobs, cabinet handles, and the cream tube. On day 15, I found it. A faint shimmer along the edge of the cream lid. Rebecca had returned. I didn't alert anyone. I didn't touch anything further. I just documented. UV scan, photos, notes. Then I lifted the throw pillow she always leaned on during visits. Beneath it, crumpled tightly, was a blank scrap of paper. No words, no markings, just a damp corner with a faint mint scent, Rebecca's signature essential oil. I understood immediately. It was a message. Not for Liam. Not for anyone else. Only for me. She was still watching. Even when it felt quiet, I wasn't safe. I escalated my backup plan. I created a new email account, one that auto-sent messages to myself every 3 days. Each email carried files, data copies, images, journal logs, each titled with date-encrypted codes in case anyone stumbled upon them. Every file password-protected and stored offline. I left a sealed dossier in the health clinic's vault, marked with instructions. Open only if I'm unreachable for more than 72 hours. I didn't know what I was racing against, but I knew if I didn't keep moving, I'd be buried by whatever Rebecca was preparing. And then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, she returned, as if she'd never left. She walked in while I was making coffee. No knock, no warning. The door had been unlocked. She smiled. Set a paper bag on the table. Inside were ginger cookies and a small pastel-colored box. I didn't open it. She didn't wait for me to. She scanned the room casually, said she was just dropping by to check in. I nodded, but I didn't flinch. I watched her hands, still soft, clean. But I wasn't looking for surface signs anymore. After she left, I pulled out the UV light, smears near the bathroom mirror. A new fingerprint on the cream, smudges on the doorknob. I photographed everything, printed, logged, filed it back into my hidden archive. I no longer felt fear the same way, only urgency. The pastel box? I never opened it. Instead, I sealed it inside a waterproof zip bag, logged the time and date, wrote it down in 2 separate notebooks. I didn't need to know what was inside. I only needed her to believe I was still unsuspecting. I started planting ideas. Told Liam I might need to leave the city soon. For work, a short course, something. He nodded. Didn't ask much. I knew. To end this, I had to flip the board completely. And now I just had to wait for her to slip up. Or perhaps engineer the slip myself. I always thought my house was the safest place, at least physically. Rebecca might meddle with my mind, intrude into the rhythm of my life, make me feel unsafe. But I never believed she'd be bold enough to harm my body directly. Until that morning. I discovered a small bruise on the inside of my left thigh, right where my nightgown would usually cover. It wasn't large, about the size of my pinky fingertip, but darker than normal, with a blue-green ring around it. The bruise was round, clean, as if made by a sharp, narrow object. I froze. As a nurse, I know what a bruise from an impact looks like. I know how spontaneous hematomas appear. And I know what kind of marks are left by needles. I've seen hundreds of those, but never on my own body. I had no memory of injecting anything there, and no reason to have been pricked by a needle in that area under any normal circumstance. The night before, I had slept unusually well. Too well. No dreams, no sudden wake-ups. And most noticeably, when I woke, my throat was dry, I felt lightheaded, and I had a fleeting headache, like after a mild anesthesia. I told no one. I just stood there in the bathroom for a long time, staring at the bruise in the mirror. I grabbed a magnifying glass and inspected more closely. At the center of the bruise was a tiny needle mark, nearly invisible unless you looked hard. Around it were faint thread-like red vessels, forming a subtle radial pattern. I calmed myself, washed my hands, used antiseptic on the area, and photographed it from every angle. I wrote down everything I felt that morning: the bitter taste in my mouth, the dizziness when I stood, the slower-than-normal heart rate for the first hour. I recorded my vitals over time. I was lucky to have personal medical equipment at home. I thought of Rebecca, and I knew, this time, it wasn't just suspicion. She had crossed the line between psychological intrusion and physical harm. I checked the hidden camera in the bedroom, the only device not connected to the internet, storing data locally and set to auto-delete after 24 hours unless backed up. The recording from that night was blank. The video file had a name, had a file size, but couldn't be played. The error code suggested encryption or partial overwriting. I knew I only had a few hours before the recording was erased for good. I moved the hard drive to a secondary laptop, installed specialized data recovery software, and began the recovery process. After nearly an hour, the software extracted a short clip, 12 seconds, no image. But there was audio, the sound of soft footsteps, fabric brushing, then a click, like a lighter being flicked or a bottle cap opening. Then steady breathing, not mine. Someone was standing beside me, breathing near my bedside. I shut the video and trembled in silence. There was no doubt anymore. That night, someone stood over me, and I didn't wake up. I decided to go to the hospital, not for a blood test. If she'd used a fast-dissolving substance, it'd be nearly impossible to detect after 24 hours. Instead, I requested a full biochemical panel: liver and kidney function, and abnormal hormone activity. I did this under a false name, through a trusted contact at a private lab. I no longer trusted any system. The results showed abnormally high cortisol levels, indicative of extreme stress or hormonal manipulation. Additionally, my ECG revealed a minor anomaly, an unusual nighttime heart rate pattern, suggesting I may have been sedated with a strong tranquilizer for 3 to 4 hours. I hadn't taken any sleep aids. There was no reason for these shifts in my health profile. When I returned home, my bedroom pillow had been changed. Not just the cover, the entire pillow. I knew because of a red stitch I had sewn myself a month ago when it tore. Now it was gone. The pillow looked identical, but it wasn't mine. I tore through the room. In the nightstand, there was a new packet of tissues I didn't recognize. Different brand, unfamiliar scent. At the bottom of the drawer was a used bandage, peeling slightly and stuck to the wood. On the surface was a tiny speck of dried blood, nearly invisible to the naked eye. I used an at-home blood type test. Result? O+, not mine. I sent the sample for anonymous DNA testing, a service I'd used before for rare hospital cases. No real name, just a code and a request for internal comparison. I knew the results wouldn't be enough to convict anyone, but they'd be enough to prove I wasn't imagining things. Days later, the report came back. The DNA didn't match mine. Female. And partially matched someone in the healthcare system, a former ER staff member from 2 years ago. Name? Rebecca F. I didn't need anything else. I printed the results, combined them with the bruise photos, the biochemical data, the physical evidence, and the audio file from that night. I created a full dossier, numbered it, sealed it. But I didn't send it. I didn't call the police. I didn't confront Liam. I didn't go public. Because one thing still wasn't clear. Why did Rebecca choose to do this now? She had waited so long. Why risk physical action when I was clearly on alert? Then I began to consider, maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning of something larger. Maybe the physical intrusion was a smokescreen, and the real plan was still unfolding. I reviewed my entire inbox and found a strange email from an unknown sender, no subject line. Just one attachment, a scanned prenatal visit form bearing my name, dated 3 weeks prior. The odd part? I'd never had such a checkup. I never received this report. Yet all the information on it, my address, date of birth, signature, was correct. All mine. I flipped the paper. On the back was faint, almost smudged text. Certified copy for insurance submission. I studied the signature. It wasn't mine. It was thin, slanted left, uneven. Rebecca is left-handed. I understood then. Everything she had done, from the needle mark to the fake medical documents, was building toward one thing: rewriting my medical history. Not just to hurt me, but to set the stage for a new narrative, a story in which I was unstable, unfit, unreliable, and she would be the ideal replacement. I used to believe Rebecca's manipulations were confined to the family. The poisoning games, the invasions of privacy, the calculated efforts to drive a wedge between me and Liam, all of it stayed within the walls of our home where I could monitor it, document it, confront it if I had to. But when I discovered the fake prenatal record, everything shifted. She was expanding the game. And this time, it wasn't just about hurting me. It was about replacing me, completely, in the eyes of others. I started retracing all the small signs I had once dismissed as harmless. Last week, a clinic I had previously used called to ask why I canceled my follow-up appointment at the last minute. I had never made such an appointment. They said I'd sounded tense and cold on the phone, then asked again, "Do you still want to keep your appointment with the perinatal mental health specialist?" I hung up. My heart turned to ice. She was building a mental health profile for me. One detail at a time, one word at a time. I logged into the hospital's online portal to review my entire medical history, appointments, call logs, internal notes. Some new files had been added a month ago, right when Rebecca had vanished. In the nurse's notes, one entry read, "Patient appears agitated, denies pregnancy, shows avoidance behavior when discussing the baby's father. Professional counseling recommended." I froze. Those notes were now part of the official medical record, stamped and verified. I didn't need to know how she'd done it. Whether she faked my voice on a call, hacked the system, or used an old contact from the hospital, it didn't matter. The result was the same. She had planted doubt inside the very system I used to trust most. And it didn't stop there. The next morning, I received an express package. No sender listed. Inside was a book titled, "Pregnancy Psychology: How to Escape the Trauma of Motherhood." On the inside cover was a handwritten note. "You don't have to suffer alone." I didn't write that. I didn't need that book. This wasn't a message for me. It was meant for anyone watching. She was crafting a new character profile for me. Fragile, unstable, emotionally unfit to be a mother. And then, in perfect balance, she would emerge as the temporary support, stepping in to help Liam, take care of me, and eventually, assume my place. I began to notice subtle changes in Liam. He no longer asked how I was feeling. Instead, he'd check if I'd taken my pills. Pills I'd never been prescribed. Once, he placed a bottle of vitamins in front of me, saying the doctor said I needed them. I scanned the barcode. It was a brand intended for perimenopausal women, completely unsuitable during pregnancy. I compared it with my medical prescriptions. That medication wasn't listed. Who prescribed it? And why did Liam believe it? I knew Rebecca had implanted something deeper into him, not just words, but feelings. Small, repetitive cues, designed to form a low, steady hum of suspicion. If I ever truly lost control, all these small details would become the foundation for a version of the truth no one could dispute. And then, I discovered the worst part. While checking Liam's calendar app one night, I found a strange note, hidden under the name car service check. When I opened it, it revealed a list of requirements for a temporary guardianship hearing. Reason: patient showing signs of emotional and psychological instability, compromising fetal safety, submitted by Rebecca F. I couldn't breathe. She had prepared everything. I didn't know how she had convinced Liam to save that note. Maybe he didn't grasp the weight of it. Maybe she said it was just a precaution in case I needed rest. But to the legal system, it was the first step in a custody claim. I removed every camera from the house. I swapped out my phone's SIM card. I uploaded every piece of medical data, journal entries, audio recordings, photographs, to a private lawyer through a one-way encrypted email. A person I had never met in real life. I wrote a 17-page sworn statement, signed it in full, and stored it in a secure vault at the bank, only to be opened if I went missing for more than 7 days. I stopped eating anything I didn't prepare myself. I locked the kitchen whenever I left the house. I installed a separate lock on the medicine drawer. I unplugged the old cameras from the internet and replaced them with an isolated system. I wrote by hand in my notebook every 6 hours, describing sensations, physical reactions, any strange signs no matter how small. I wasn't paranoid. I was trying to survive. And then, something strange happened. Liam came home late, drunk, a rare event for him. While helping him take off his shirt, I noticed a tiny piece of paper crumpled inside the sleeve. I unfolded it. It was an ultrasound image, but it wasn't mine. Different angle, different fetal position. And the text below read, RF, with the same date as mine. Rebecca was pregnant, or pretending to be pregnant to complete her replacement role? I don't know which is worse. All I know is, I have no time left. I used to think Rebecca was the type who would only stop once she reached her ultimate goal. But now, I began to see that she had a weakness, her arrogance. When someone believes they're smarter than everyone else, they start to get careless, they start leaving cracks, and eventually, they dig their own grave. After finding the ultrasound marked with RF, I quietly traced the hospital's access logs. There was an internal registration system that every former medical staffer knew about, a place where drafts, temporary records, and incomplete forms left behind digital fingerprints tied to an ID. I borrowed the badge of an old friend still working at the hospital and went straight into the temp files. There, I found an account locked 6 months ago, an ID belonging to an administrative nurse named Brittany. She'd once worked with me until she was fired for mishandling a backup that corrupted patient data. And yet, the access history showed a login from that same account just 3 weeks earlier, the exact day the fake prenatal record appeared in my inbox. I knew Brittany couldn't access the system anymore. But Rebecca, who had worked alongside her, who spent long nights in that same computer lab, would have known exactly how to use those old credentials. I saved screenshots, the user ID, timestamps, and file names. My name, my address, the fabricated lab results, all modified at that very time. I almost had the technical blueprint of her plan. But it still wasn't enough. Rebecca wasn't just manipulating paperwork. She was manipulating trust. And once trust fractures, the truth itself becomes irrelevant. I needed evidence that couldn't be denied. One idea came to me: hair samples. Rebecca had been in my house often. Her long hair, always tied high, sometimes fell loose. I remembered clearly. Once, a strand had dropped onto my vanity when she leaned in too close, pretending to admire my lipstick. I had been too tired to clean it then, too distracted. But now, that strand was hope. I searched the drawer, found the hair, sealed it carefully in foil with clear tape. Then I sent it for DNA testing, asking for a match against the dried blood I had discovered earlier on the discarded bandage in my nightstand. 48 hours later, the results came back. A 100% match. She had been inside my bedroom, she had touched my belongings, and she had left behind biological evidence, without consent. Now I held proof that stretched across digital, physical, and biological domains. But I still didn't act, because one question remained. Why hadn't Liam reacted? If I could trace her moves, surely he could too. If I sensed the wrongness, he couldn't possibly be blind to it. So why the silence? I decided to test him. I created an anonymous email account and sent him a packet of evidence. The fake prenatal form under my name, the ultrasound that didn't match, and the forged signature. I added only one question. Are you sure I am the one who's pregnant? No reply. 3 days later, I checked the offline cameras. I watched Liam sitting at his desk, staring at that same email. He opened it, read it again and again. Then he pulled out an envelope from a drawer, the very crumpled ultrasound I had once found in his shirt. He held both documents under the lamp, comparing them. And his face wasn't shock. It was recognition, as if he already knew. I began to realize maybe Liam had been aware for some time that Rebecca was orchestrating something, but unsure of what was true, he chose silence. He waited. Or worse, he was part of it. I couldn't rule that out anymore. So I started watching Liam closely. He came home on time. He carried nothing unusual. But there was one detail I couldn't ignore. Whenever I said I felt unwell, he offered to take me to a clinic. Not the hospital we trusted, but a private practice that had only just opened. I pretended to agree, then checked the place myself. The clinic's name? It was the same as Rebecca's mother's maiden name, the very one ID seen framed in her family photos. I didn't go in as myself. I registered under an alias, pretending to be a different patient, asking if my sister had a record there. I chose a name almost identical to mine, just to test them. Their reply? The file has been locked at the request of the guardian. Guardian. I had never signed guardianship rights to anyone. I had never visited that clinic. There should be no file. I combed through federal medical law. A patient can only be assigned a medical guardian if there is official documentation of temporary or permanent incapacity, and such a petition requires court approval. So who had signed my file? I hired a lawyer to investigate discreetly. Within 72 hours, I had the answer. A medical guardianship authorization had been filed under my name with a forged signature. The listed guardian, Rebecca F. The stated reason: patient experiencing psychological distress after pregnancy-related trauma. She hadn't just forged my identity, she had given herself legal power over me. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. The game was over. I drafted a formal police report, attaching every shred of evidence: the forgeries, the intrusions, the guardianship scam, the DNA results, the biological traces, the late-night audio recording. As soon as the file was sent, I left the house. I moved in with a trusted friend, a former head nurse who understood the system and could protect me if needed. 3 days later, my lawyer called. Rebecca had been summoned. At the station, when questioned about the forged files, she denied everything. But when the police presented the DNA results, the audio evidence, and the sworn statement of a former hospital employee she had manipulated into lending credentials, she fell silent. For the first time, Rebecca said nothing. No excuses, no reversals, No mocking smile, no control, just silence. But I knew. Silence didn't mean surrender. I had everything a woman could possibly need to protect herself: legal documents, photographic evidence, journals signed and notarized, medical copies, police reports, lawyers, and even a safe place to stay with someone ready to testify for me. But strangely, when I finally had it all, I didn't feel relief. What I felt was colder than any moment when Rebecca was still lurking in the shadows. It was the sense that the storm had pulled back, only to leave a tidal wave waiting beneath the surface. I knew she hadn't given up. She was only retreating, gathering herself for the final blow. The kind of blow no camera or file could shield me from. I returned home on a Saturday, nearly a week after hiding away. The police had already come once, taken statements, confirmed the files, but they couldn't arrest Rebecca yet. No charges had been filed. The system was still dragging along, caught in its own process. But I couldn't wait. When I opened the door, everything looked untouched. No signs of intrusion, no strange smell, no broken cameras. But something was wrong. It was instinct. I checked every room. Everything was in its place except one detail: the journal I always hid beneath the bed. The last page had been turned. I never left it like that. And that page was blank. I flipped through. Every other page of detailed notes was still there. But the final page, the one where I had planned to write my last thoughts about Rebecca if I never got another chance, had been torn halfway out. I hadn't torn it. I hadn't opened it all week. Someone had been here. I checked the local camera backups. 7 minutes of footage missing, on the exact night I'd been staying at my friend's house 40 kilometers away. No alarm, no forced entry, just a gap. And I knew. She was back. That night, I didn't sleep. I did nothing but sit at my desk, staring at the lamp, thinking about everything I had endured. Every time I doubted myself. Every time I looked at Liam and couldn't decide if I should trust him or retreat. Every time I forced a smile at Rebecca to keep the peace. Every time I wondered, was I too paranoid? No, I had never been wrong. I had only been too late to realize that some people don't want you to lose. They want you to fall apart. And then, my phone vibrated. Not a text. Not a call. A security alert. Motion detected. Kitchen, 2:38 a.m. I froze, opened the app. Nothing. Just the dark, silent kitchen. I zoomed in, waited. Then saw it. A faint reflection. A shadow sliding across the refrigerator. Too faint to make out. But tall, slender, with hair tied back. It could only be her. She hadn't come to kill me. She had come to see how much fear I could hold. I locked my door, pulled the wooden box from under the bed, the one with the old kitchen knife, the pepper spray, and the emergency whistle I'd once been given in nurse training. I didn't have weapons, but I had reason. I didn't call the police. I waited until morning. When the sun rose, I went downstairs. No one. But on the table lay a folded handkerchief, the kind sold only at a maternity shop, the same place where I had once bought delivery clothes. At the corner, stitched initials, R.M. Rebecca had once used that name in medical school after changing her name following an accident. No stains, no smell, no note. But it was a declaration of war. I left the house again, but not to run. I went back to the hospital where I once worked. I met the department head, turned over all evidence, and demanded an official internal investigation into unauthorized record access, falsified documents, and stolen identity. I knew she might have allies inside the system, but I was no longer afraid. I also filed a civil suit, parallel to the criminal charges waiting for indictment. 3 days later, my lawyer called. They had uncovered a chain of emails impersonating me, sent to doctors, former colleagues, even my parents, claiming I was unstable and needed help. The emails were routed through a VPN from another state, but the signature was an image of mine, one I had used 4 years ago on a job application. She had saved everything since the day I entered their family. On the fourth day, I was summoned to court. Not for my case. Rebecca had turned herself in. No explanation, no apology, no confession, just silence. When I saw her through the glass, she wasn't the woman I once hated. She was someone with nothing left to lose, and that made her just as dangerous. 1 week later, the verdict came. Rebecca was held for investigation, charged with 4 crimes: falsification of medical documents, unlawful entry, attempted poisoning, and illegal medical guardianship. I thought I would feel relief, but I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I only sat in silence. Because I knew, even though it was over, I would never be the same. Trust, once the backbone of my life, had been twisted, shredded, patched together with fragments of suspicion. I was still pregnant. I still had a family to build. But I would never forget that once, someone I was told to call family had tried to take everything from me, through the sweetest, quietest, most calculated cruelty. And now, after hearing my story, I want to ask you, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have spoken up sooner, or stayed silent until the evidence became undeniable? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear them. If you've ever faced someone toxic in your life, know this: you are not alone.